Mr. Prime Minister Trudeau. My name is Gavin Walsh and I'm from Ireland. I've spent the past 14 years investigating a tragic air crash, an Irish air crash from 1952, in which all 23 people perished, one of whom was a Canadian citizen. And indeed, this Canadian citizen herself had a daughter, so perhaps that daughter would have qualified as a Canadian citizen also. In any event, I am trying to bring to your attention that at that time in 1951, the ICAO had an annex called 13, or an adjunct called Annex 13, which entitled the Canadian Transportation Safety Board to have a member at that investigation. Needless to say, this was deprived to them. In fact, the accident was not even brought to their attention, and hence why 73 years later I am attempting to bring it to your attention. And so Prime Minister Trudeau, the Canadian lady that lost her life on board the St. Kevin was a lady called Dorothy Ivy Martin. She married a senior Aer Lingus captain. She actually married him in Canada. He was with the RAF. He was a British man training with the RAF, obtaining his wings in Canada, as a lot of them did in those days. They trained in World War II in Canada. And he was dispatched to Canada to train to obtain his wings. And there he met two sisters from the Women's Division of the Royal Canadian Air Force, Dorothy, the aforementioned Dorothy, and her sister Georgina. And obviously he fell in love with Dorothy and they got married, and they had a son in Canada who is alive to this day in Canada, a man by the name of Terry Laker. And he himself has children, and they themselves have children. So the Lakers live on in Canada. But in any event, Richard Laker went back to fight in the war, and a very, very esteemed bomber pilot he became. And his wife, having given birth, followed him back the following year. And he then obtained a job in the new Irish airline, or the flourishing Irish airline called Aer Lingus. And he and his wife went back from England. She had joined him in England in 1946, I believe. And they went back then to Ireland to obtain this job in Aer Lingus. And as things went, they had another child, a daughter, and they just, for one reason or another, generally financially, they just never got back to reclaim their first child, their firstborn son, Terry, who I mentioned a few moments ago. And by the time that he was ready to move back to Canada, he had applied for a job in the National Canadian Air Carrier, and he was supposed to move back that spring of 1952. He unfortunately lost his life in an accident in January 1952. Now, he was not flying, he was not piloting at the time that he was killed. So he, his wife, and their daughter, Sharon Melly, the daughter born in Dublin, they were all killed in this air crash. And whilst Nicky Laker was not on the pilot manifest that night, there's no question he was in the cockpit trying to get them out of their woes that they were in. He was actually one of Aer Lingus's most highly qualified and respected pilots. But enough of him. Let's go back to the Martin family, Dorothy Martin and Georgina. They were, as I said, they were in the women's division of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Now, they come from a very respected family in a small little town of about 6,000 people called Keohane in the province of Ontario. And their father was William Martin, and he was a very well looked up to and respected individual. He was behind the building of the hospital. He was one of the main forces in getting the hospital built in the early 40s in Keohane. And this was just a massive loss to the town of Keohane. Even though they never met the child who died, they obviously knew of their lost daughter, Dorothy Ivy. And the town knew of their son-in-law, because they had been there to get married, and he had been in that town to meet all his in-laws. And it was a tragic loss, made even infinitely more tragic by the fact that whilst Nicky Laker's body, or parts of his body, were recovered, and he did receive a Christian burial in his own hometown of Midhurst, which is in East Sussex in South England, his wife and daughter were never found. And again, that goes back to prove that he was in the cockpit at the time of the impact, that he was found along with another co-pilot called Alec Newman. But very tragic, Mr. Trudeau. And again, the families don't want to cast any blame. They don't want any retribution or revenge or none of that nonsense. They want the truth to come out as to what really befell that flight. And I have that truth. And I will ask you for the same thing as I'm asking President Trump for. 5 minutes, one investigator from the Canadian Transportation Safety Board. And as I've said at the start of this video, the Canadian people were entitled to that. The Canadian aviation community, the people of Cochrane, the families, more importantly, of the Martin family, were entitled to that under the April 11, 1951, Annex 13 of the ICAO, adjunct at that time to have an inspector on the investigation. Of course, that was denied to them. It was denied to the Americans, hence why I'm going after President Trump. And it was also, believe it or not, denied to the British government, who officially were supposed to run the crash. More of that in a later video, Mr. Trudeau. In the spirit of truth and fairness and transparency, and more importantly, justice, I am asking you for the same as I asked President Trump for, which is 5 minutes. I understand there's 245 air crash investigators in Canada. I want 5 minutes with one of them. We can do it on the phone, or I can get to, I understand your offices are in Gatineau in Quebec. I can get there in a heartbeat. I will meet anybody, anytime, any place to stand over my story. And I look forward to hearing from you, or preferably an investigator, as I'm sure do the Martins of Cochrane, Ontario, Canada. Thank you, sir. God bless.